Let me just preface by saying this is not an API session, so Pat might have been slightly misinformed, but it's still relevant to what I'm going to be talking about. So for the next half hour, basically what I wanted to talk about is some ideas and hopefully give you some inspiration around how to connect strategy with technology as well as people, because I think those pieces need to fit together before you start diving into technology. And as I'm kind of going about this, I'm also trying to contextualize it with sort of a maturity lens. So think of where you are on your journey. Rather, this is kind of like a storytelling device. It's not really a prescription or a judgment, but you can use that as like sort of like a mental model. So just to preface with that. With that being said, so where are we right now? Bunch of things going on with AI affecting every single industry, and really when it comes to institutions, like AI doesn't matter if you don't have good data and if you don't have good governance, so you need to get that right also. There's things like changing open research mandates and so on that are very different from region to region. So it really underlines also the importance of having persistent identifiers captured and good metadata and so on. There's also things around security and privacy. So we have cyber attacks, changing legislation, principles of data minimization and so on. And all of these things are quite important to think about in this day and age. And of course, budgets. It's not really a new thing. It's probably something that's always been relevant, but I think that in the context of having constrained budgets, but also still an ongoing appetite for faster insights, balancing that need is ever more challenging. And so that really means that the focus on efficiency and being able to leverage your data and connecting and integrating becomes more important, because that's how you gain leverage. And we've been talking a lot about fourth generation universities during this week. This idea that you're also being judged in an increasingly higher manner around societal impacts and not just outputs. So my point here really is that integration isn't really a nice to have. It's really become sort of a core need in a modern research management ecosystem. So just to introduce a model here. So this, some of you may have seen it, some of you may have not. I know that Amy's seen it. And what this is really, it's from a paper back in 2007 where they were, the authors were talking about the veterans health admin. In the 90s, it was a horrendous system. A lot of veterans, they couldn't get benefits because it was so poorly built. And then the good thing about this story is that it was really a turnaround story. So they actually traveled through these different stages to turn it around and actually become one of the best systems in the US, and they actually were able to deliver towards their mission. So what it shows is really that some organizations start here on the left-hand side from as a starting point where systems are really built as silos. You don't have good integration, things aren't connected. And gradually, as you mature, you get more value out of standardizing and having enterprise-wide standards and so on. And this is kind of like the sort of subtle anchor that I'll try to keep as we have some of the upcoming examples. And the thinking behind this is that you can't skip stages, but capabilities kind of accrue as you get more and more. You build capabilities and move through these different stages that you kind of build that institutional capability and knowledge. Maybe you can think a little bit about where you feel like which stage you're at in this model. And then just a lot has happened since 2007. So this thinking was before the advent of cloud computing that we see today, as well as the exponential changes we've seen in AI. And also some of the advances that have been in change management and organizational principles and so on, that organizations have actually gotten better at many of these things, and it's not necessarily sort of a sequential process. So some things to strive for in a sort of with a modern lens are things like federated teams. So you have, rather than just centralized IT, you have architects that are embedded with the domain experts. So you're really building solutions with the people that understand the context. And you still have central IT. It's generally just a smaller team that have important mandates. So for instance, security, compliance, and so on. So that makes a lot of sense. And then there's the idea of data autonomy, so that research information management system sort of lives side by side with other systems that serve their purpose, and you're exchanging data, and this is done in sort of a controlled manner. And in terms of living artifacts, well, it's really, in the old-fashioned approach is just to document things and then track things separately. But in this principle is around doing both things at the same time. So your documentation also becomes your observability, and also clearly defining metrics. So metrics that actually matter. So are we measuring the right thing? Is it moving us closer towards the goals that we care about? So things could be cost reduction, it could be researcher satisfaction, and so on. And again, just to make the point, this is really a facilitator around how we think about organizing around enterprise architecture. Where does Pure fit into this context? Well, I made this little diagram, and it's kind of like a little village of systems. And the point is that Pure lives alongside many different systems that many of you may have to some extent, and already invested a lot of time and effort into. And they serve their distinct purposes, and they're not going away. And well, what's the point here? Well, if you connect the dots, you can actually gain leverage by being able to sort of integrate with, let's say, for instance, your data warehouse, your analytics workflows through a middleware layer and connecting Pure there. And again, you don't have to think of it as Pure sort of like being in the middle here. It can be anywhere. So this is just kind of like an idealized illustration of that. But that being said, so what's Pure good at? Well, Pure really excels at being a place for curated metadata and so on, and persistent identifiers and workflows. And we all know the strengths of Pure. So you can leverage that and then really gain an advantage by you leaning in on Pure's strengths, and also leaning in on the individual strengths of the different systems. In sort of a modern lens, like, well, how do you do good integrations in this day and age? Well, modern organizations, they opt for sort of an API-first strategy. And what does that mean? It means that if you build something, or if you have a piece of software, well, you want to make sure that there's an API that you can integrate with. It's going to make your life a lot easier. And this acronym, iPaaS, it actually stands for Integration Platform as a Service, and it's kind of synonymous with this middleware concept that I shared earlier. And so you also build resilience into this, and monitoring and observability, so you know what's going on, so you can quality control your integration. And there's also the idea of event-driven. So what's event-driven? Well, so imagine you call a system and ask it for information. So that's really polling. And whereas event-driven, that's kind of like the Hollywood principle, like, don't call us, we'll call you when we have changes. So you'll get a message when there's fresh data, and then you can react to that information and then replay it in the downstream systems. And data, really thinking of data as products, so they have contracts. And so what's a data contract? Well, it's really sort of a formalization that you're bridging a business requirement with sort of a technical implementation. So you know you have guardrails around quality, provenance, and so on. And sync versus federation, that's really, well, do I want to live query information, or do I want to make a copy? And that really comes down to, well, what do you need? Like, do you need all data at once, or can you query it on demand? So you choose that based on what the use case is. What this means is really, it's like integrations aren't point-to-point anymore. They're not brittle one-to-one integrations. You're thinking of it holistically. So now, sort of with that, setting the stage with this, I have a couple of examples. They're based on sort of a mashup of some real integrations that we've seen out there in the wild. So some of you may recognize it, some of you may see this as a new thing, but let's see the first one. And think of identity as a foundation. So if you don't get identity right, you're not really going to go far anywhere. And so problem statement is really, so we need a clean, trusted staff list. We don't want duplicates. There should be no mysteries. And so the idea is to get your data from your HR system, and then how do you measure success? Well, think of it as spending less time on reconciling profiles. You have less duplicates, you get better reporting, and it's much faster to provide sort of a roster for leadership reports and so on for different purposes. And from sort of from a maturity lens, you could start with saying, well, let's start simple, a weekly HR sync, and then just basically highlight duplicates and say, okay, we can actually see the duplicates now. The next step could be, well, let's make sure that we capture persistent identifiers, maybe beyond HR IDs. You want to have mandates around ORCID, you want to enrich with Scopus IDs, and so on, whatever makes sense, and then build that up. And again, sort of, you can implement this in different ways. So it's like really, it's guardrails rather than gates. You're not really policing researchers necessarily, but you're making it sort of a principle rather than as principle over policy, basically. And then sort of as you move through these stages, you can make it smarter, golden record, so there's really one source of truth that you have for a particular person. You have a system of record and so on. And then towards the end, you could say, well, okay, we have such good quality here in this system that we can use this as sort of a foundation to share with other systems that, well, this is our system of record for identification, essentially. So the idea is really, well, you want one source of truth for who's funded for what and for what today. And so linking funding to projects and outcomes, and you also want to reconcile with finance. So starting with, again, with minimal feeds, and then you automate this and move towards sort of an event-driven architecture. And sort of the payoff here is really that you're eliminating manual reconciliation, and you have timely reports. So you think of the metrics here, you're saving time on reconciliation, you get faster reporting. So these are like clear business outcomes. So, and also just one point here is that grants management is quite different in the United States than here in Europe. So I think that this thinking applies both to pure with award management as well as without. Third one. So this you might recognize around impact narratives, but don't get too hung up on that. This could be pure impact AI. It could be another AI layer that you could think of in terms of demonstrating your impact, or maybe something completely different. So you really want, the problem statement here is that you want to turn your messy outputs into credible impact stories. And so you really want to link data here, that's the point. And you want to start with importing the data you need. You need to make sure that you've got good IDs again, DOIs, and then sort of build out your research graph. So making sure that projects and awards are linked with research output and so on, and activities, whatever really makes sense in this context, because then you can build sort of a line of sight from funding to output and then to impact, essentially. So I think I'm not going to go too much into pure impact AI here, as this was covered in a different session. So here the idea is like sort of a partnership finder. So in a way you have a way for pure data to become discoverable. So for instance, let's say you want to figure out, well, querying Pure's award data, you want to have sort of an interactive capability to figure out, well, who could I partner with based on funding that's already been done, the grants that have been that have already been awarded, and the idea is to sort of you combine sort of the Pure API with the portal, and then you're able to ask sort of conversational questions to the data. And then again, there's sort of some ideas here around metrics in terms of like time to find a partner and engagement. And then these are sort of the steps that you could go through in terms of capabilities as well as how advanced it is. And just to make the point also is that AI really only adds value when you have good integration and that the governance is solid. So just to make the point there, otherwise you're really just amplifying chaos. Okay, so a few examples there. And I think no matter what you're trying to do in terms of integration, well, there's always going to be challenges, and there's typical things that can go wrong. And so what do you do? Well, you can have data model mismatches when you're integrating. Typically, you'll have like one system, and you're trying to convert it to a different format. And you might have different systems that have different concepts of the same kind of thing. Well, what do you do? Well, canonical mapping is really just a standardization of what something should look like. So, for instance, a person, you have these different metadata fields, and then you agree, well, this is the format that we're going to use going forward. Duplicates, I think that's pretty self-describing. So you solve that with persistent IDs, and then you also have some matching rules to consolidate and get rid of the duplicates. So freshness versus stability. So you can really think of that as well. How old is the data? How reliable is it? SLA, that's really a service level agreement. So you say, well, let's come up with an arrangement for how often data is refreshed, and that this should be use case driven. So how often do you really need something? Do you need it daily, hourly, or do you need it just on a weekly basis? And that really comes down to where it comes from and what you need it for. Authority disputes. Well, that's really about, well, what's the system of record? Where should this actually be coming from? Well, then you solve this by using data contracts, which say this particular information comes from here at this frequency with these quality controls. It's owned by this team, and so on. So rather than it becomes this loosely defined agreement, you actually have a contract that again translates the business requirement into a technical implementation. And then change management is also a big piece in this. So you're working with people, you're building things for people, and this idea of co-design is, again, you're building with the people that are using it rather than building it for them. So they're much more involved. You can de-risk a lot of the sort of fallout by actually involving stakeholders early and working alongside them. And I think it's also worth pointing out that these challenges kind of shift depending on where you are on your own sort of maturity journey. It's like these are things you kind of work out as you're getting better at integrating and working sort of in a cross-functional setting. So that's really, I think that's normal. It's not really, doesn't really mean you're failing, that if all of these things are a challenge at the same time, because it's subject to change as you get better at doing this kind of thing. And just earlier from the diagram that I showed, so these are kind of like the building blocks, if you will, when you think of sort of a modern reference architecture. It's not, again, it's not prescriptive, it's something to strive for. Maybe some parts of this are useful to you and they apply to you. I mean, I hope Pure will stay relevant for everyone. Just putting that out there. But the idea here is that you integrate Pure through this middleware layer, so this integration platform as a service, and you can build additional sort of practices on top of this. So you have versioned data contracts, so as things evolve, you publish a new version of a data contract, and you have different deployment models for the integration. So rather than just shifting and releasing, you actually have guardrails, so if something breaks, you just roll it back or fail forward, basically. And you build in sort of automated quality checks here. So you're not really describing sort of a one vendor stack here. It's really sort of a combination of things, and the point here is to make integrations more resilient and future-proof them. So just on metrics, I think the point is that you want to choose durable, robust metrics that really make sense to your mission. What one university is measuring doesn't necessarily make sense for you, and vice versa. So some ideas here are, you can look at strategic, or operational, could be clearly business type metrics. So you really, the point with metrics is to basically being able to tell a story that you're moving the needle towards where you want to be. So so if it's not really telling you whether you're moving the needle or not, then it's probably not worth measuring, essentially. So you're really making progress visible where it matters by choosing the right metrics. So I would say, start with a couple of metrics and then build on that afterwards. So get a couple right first, and then you can expand later on. So just mapping this back to sort of this maturity model is a few examples here. So you'd start by stabilizing and sort of surfacing data where it's needed, and then once you've got that right, you can work on building on top of this and really refining it further, and then at some stage also build in some automation and come up with some service level agreements in terms of, well, what are the guarantees that we are what are the guarantees that we are making for our data products and self-service BI and so on. And then sort of at the end here you have this sort of idea that you can reach plug and play. So maybe you want to plug and play directly with other parts of the institution, maybe even third parties. So really, you can start here and really build it into something that's completely different and very very valuable towards the end. Okay, so it's really about composability towards the end. With this being said, it can be quite a lot to take in, but if you want to sort of get some experience in very quickly, you could do so. Well, pick something very small. Don't be too over-ambitious. So pick a small integration, could be persons, awards, and so on, and then pilot it, prove value, and then measure the outcome, and then collect feedback from stakeholders, and then see if it works, and then try something else afterwards, or maybe build on top of it, and then try to build momentum. Okay, and then just in terms of making sure that you're set up for success, well, I think leadership and commitment. So you need like a strong vision and so long-term commitment from leadership to make this work. They need collaboration between central as well as local groups, and it should be evolutionary rather than a revolutionary change. And it's really a strategy for supporting systems and processes and local accountability for global objectives. And finally, performance management is tied into technology as well as the business processes. So these are the catalysts that can transform an organization, and they're also relevant for universities today. Okay, just to close the loop here on where we are from enterprise architecture then and now. So the side-by-side comparison, just let you take this in for a moment. I think the point is that this thinking, it helps you escape silos, and this just helps you actually get towards your goals faster, essentially. So you're moving faster towards better outcomes by looking at it from the 2025 enterprise architecture maturity lens. Okay, this is really a little bit of the same. And takeaway, so it's really a ladder if you think of maturity, and maturity can be a very different thing depending on where you are and what's important to you. So, but you can think of it sort of as a staircase. And when building into this system of systems integration, well, Pure has its strengths, it has its role, as well as other systems have their unique capabilities, and you want to double down on what they're good at, and then figure out, well, what makes sense to integrate with Pure. And then if you think about data products and getting that right, well, then you can build AI on top of it and really future-proof your organization as well as your data. So my call to action here is like, maybe try to experiment with an integration. So pick one thing, start small, and then publish it, measure it, and then try to prove value. So go nuts, basically. That's what I had. Thank you. Thank you.